Welcome to the high-level event, Women's Rights, Gender Equality, and the Future of Biodiversity, organized by the Government of Costa Rica and Women for Biodiversity, with the support of the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, WWF, and partners IUCN, Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Fundación Ambiente y Recursos Naturales, and International Women's Rights Action Watch Asia Pacific. My name is Pamela Castillo, lead of the Technical Secretariat of the Gender Parity Initiative of Costa Rica. Today, I have the honor to co-moderate this great event alongside with Maya Hakayama, Senior Presenter for BBC Africa. Before we begin, I will run quickly through some logistics. We will have interpretation in the following languages: English, Spanish, Chinese, Russian, Arabic, French, and sign language. Please select the language of your preference using the global sign at the bottom of your screen. Participants can ask questions to any speaker or panelist during the event in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, indicating your name, country, and for who the question is addressed. They will be answered directly in the chat. Let's begin. Today, humanity faces 4 interrelated crises: health, climate, biodiversity, and the socioeconomic crisis. This reality calls upon us to urgently reflect on the current economic development model, its impact on nature, and the social gaps caused by it. But we cannot stay reflecting. This is the time to make decisions, generate solutions, and implement different actions that promote collaborative leadership and put nature and human rights at the forefront of the development agenda. To achieve this, it is necessary to design and implement innovative solutions that contribute to close structural gaps deepened by the effects of the pandemic and without leaving anyone behind. In this regard, the CDB post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework represents an opportunity to not just recognize the historical contribution of women to conservation and the sustainable use of biodiversity, but to agree on firm actions that will accelerate the inclusion of girls and women as leaders of environmental solutions that became engines of an inclusive and equitable economic reactivation. The challenges are complex and require true commitment of all stakeholders. This is why the main objectives of these events are to provide an introduction to gender and environmental linkages, emphasize the importance of including gender-responsive actions into environmental policy spaces, in particular to the CDB post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, inspire women in the field and increase their visibility, inspire public and private sector leaders and donors to invest in nature-based solutions and support women's leadership initiatives. We have the honor to have the participation of important leaders during this event. A special welcome to la Honorable Vicepresidenta de Costa Rica, Epsi Campbell, la Honorable Vicepresidenta de Uruguay, Beatriz Argimón, Ms. Elizabeth Murmuna, Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, Mr. Basil Banhart, co-chair of the CBD Open-Ended Working Group for the Post-2020, Mr. Dave Boyd, UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Environment, Ms. Ray, Director of Women for Biodiversity, and Maria Schultz, Senior Policy Specialist and Coordinator for Biodiversity and Ecosystem for the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency. Without further ado, we will start the event with a video message from Ms. Murmuna.
Dear colleagues, Greetings to you all in attendance. It is indeed my pleasure to speak with you all today on this paramount theme targeted for this event. I send you warm greetings from Kunming, China, as we begin the first part of the Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, which will address, among other key issues, the development and the importance of implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. In this regard, I welcome the opportunity to bring to your attention the role of gender in the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and its future implementation. Already, at the last Conference of the Parties, the precondition to engage gender was acknowledged by the parties. Not surprising, they already agreed then that the process to develop the framework has to uphold appropriate representation, particularly of women and girls, to guarantee it being gender responsive by systematically integrating gender perspectives into the process. This is no longer business as usual approach. To ensure gender perspectives are fully considered requires engaging women and girls from the grassroots to the global level. Moreover, it means providing opportunities for women and men from diverse cultures, races, ethnicities, and ages to have an equal voice in decisions that affect their future. The COVID-19 pandemic makes it all clear how those who are most marginalized, most often women and girls, suffer the most brunt of the crisis and impact. These include insecure employment, increased burden of caregiving, and heightened risk of gender violence. Signs of impact of the combined biodiversity, climate, and pollution crises for peoples around the world are already feasible, although the full impacts are yet to be assessed. The first draft of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, specifically at Target 21, acknowledges and recognizes the necessity of appropriate recognition of gender equality, women's empowerment, youth, gender-responsive approaches, and full and effective participation of indigenous peoples and local communities in its implementation. Accordingly, the target proposes to ensure equitable and effective participation in decision-making related to biodiversity by indigenous peoples and local communities, and respect their rights over land, territories, and resources, as well as by women and girls and youth. The target further provides a significant entry point for concerted action to advance the engagement of women and girls in all their diversity in decision-making processes at all levels. Nonetheless, we must recognize that action on gender cannot be regulated only by one target. It must be understood to be a cross-cutting issue, requiring cross-cutting approach to support the effective implementation of all agreed goals and targets. The transformative changes required involve revisiting our relationship with nature and changing the way we relate to each other, including all those recognized under Target 21. Without enabling the equal and effective engagement of all gender, particularly women and girls, in taking decisions and actions to conserve, sustainably manage, and use, and including equitably share the benefits accruing from the biodiversity, we cannot expect to achieve the goals and the targets of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. It cannot be up to a select few to determine the future of the majority. It requires all of us and all of you. I welcome your efforts in putting a spotlight on gender and the roles and the needs of women for biodiversity. Thank you, and I wish you fruitful discussions.
Thank you, Ms. Munmuna. Ahora tengo el honor de invitar a la vicepresidenta de la República, Beatriz Argimón, quien también es presidenta de la Asamblea y presidenta del Senado de Uruguay. La señora Beatriz Argimón se convirtió en el 2019 en la primera mujer electa vicepresidenta de su país. Fue diputada por 2 periodos consecutivos, directora del Instituto Nacional de Menores. Además, es fundadora de la bancada bicameral femenina y de la Fundación Álvarez Caldeiro Barcia. Sea muy bienvenida, vicepresidenta. Le dejo el espacio para que nos brinde sus palabras de enmarque político y de la importancia de incluir expresamente a las mujeres en el marco mundial de la biodiversidad post-2020. Vicepresidenta, el espacio es suyo.
Un placer estar en esta conferencia, a la cual le asigno una gran importancia. Primero, agradecer a quienes la convocan, porque es verdad que esfuerzos de estas características para hacer notorio algunos aspectos que a esta altura parece increíble no tenerse en cuenta pese a todos los esfuerzos. Realmente es importante agradecer quienes están dispuestos a organizarnos y a darnos la oportunidad de tener este marco de intercambios. Así que luego de agradecerle a la organización y darle a todos mis saludos, quiero básicamente empezar por manifestar mi compromiso en todo lo que tiene que ver con la necesaria interpretación de una vez por todas que no puede haber acciones que tengan que ver con la biodiversidad, que por lo tanto tiene que ver con nuestra propia vida, nuestro entorno, y lo que queremos dejarle a las futuras generaciones sin la intervención directa de las mujeres y las niñas. La verdad resulta a esta altura, luego de todos los esfuerzos que la comunidad internacional ha estado realizando respecto a no solo tener claro que la Declaración de los Derechos Humanos admite obviamente una única interpretación y es la igualdad entre hombres y mujeres, cómo se ha tenido que ir manifestando también la comunidad internacional en términos de hacer visible la inequidad que existe en nuestras sociedades respecto a la necesaria igualdad entre hombres y mujeres. A eso le agregamos que a esta altura es inadmisible que se tomen medidas en todo lo que tiene que ver con el cuidado del ambiente, con la diversidad, sin el liderazgo de las mujeres, a nivel macro, pero fundamentalmente a nivel local y de las comunidades. ¿Por qué decimos esto? Porque obviamente si hay alguien que le preocupa todo lo que tiene que ver con la biodiversidad, la necesidad de mantener permanentemente ese rol educador que las mujeres tenemos en nuestras sociedades, es precisamente el tema del futuro que dejamos para las nuevas generaciones. El protagonismo de las mujeres en nuestras comunidades, en la sociedad local, es realmente a esta altura del siglo XXI incomprensible que no se tenga en cuenta. Por eso, cuando estamos hablando de acciones que tienen que ver con la salud de nuestra comunidad, con el ambiente en general, con la alimentación, porque de todo esto se trata. Es inadmisible que a esta altura no se nos involucre en la toma de decisiones nacional y local a las mujeres y también a las niñas. Por eso estos encuentros son importantes, mucho más teniendo en cuenta que hemos tenido que afrontar un flagelo como es la lucha contra el COVID-19 en lo macro. Globalmente hemos tenido que salir a enfrentarnos a esta pandemia y todos sabemos que también es difícil salir de la misma en términos de los efectos que la misma ha dejado. Por eso las medidas tienen que tomarse más rápido, las decisiones tienen que no demorarse, y mucho menos cuando se trata de la biodiversidad. Por lo que yo quiero cerrar mi apertura diciendo que ratifico mi compromiso en lo que tiene que ver con el trabajo en pos de un involucramiento inmediato de las mujeres en todos estos temas y fortalecer los liderazgos de nosotras, tanto a nivel nacional como a nivel local, porque ya no puede seguir existiendo esa ausencia de las mujeres en un tema que viene con nosotras mismas desde épocas de nuestros ancestros. Así que quiero ratificar mi compromiso, estoy a las órdenes, sepan ustedes que muy especialmente en este tema pueden contar conmigo. Un gran abrazo desde aquí, desde el sur de América del Sur.
Muchísimas gracias, señora vicepresidenta, por sus declaraciones en favor de la inclusión de las mujeres, por su liderazgo y por su tiempo de estar hoy aquí alzando la voz por todas las mujeres del mundo. Muchas gracias. Now, I will invite Ms. Ray, who will provide us with an introduction to the importance of understanding and taking steps to address gender environmental linkages in order to meet the twin goals of meeting the objectives of the CBD post-2020, as well as for women's empowerment and gender equality. A special welcome, Ms. Ray. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Pamela. And it's a wonderful, wonderful event to have put together and see some wonderful participants and everybody. So thank you so much. So I will begin with a little bit about the CBD and how it is really linked with the gender. So the Convention on the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity's preamble text, recognizes the vital role that women play in the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, and affirms the need for the full participation of women in the implementation of the convention. Subsequently, the general principle for the program of work on the implementation of Article 8J of the convention calls for the full and effective participation of women and indigenous and local communities. The CBD was also the first of the Rio Conventions to have adopted a gender plan of action in 2008, making it the first multilateral environmental agreement to do so, and updated the Gender Plan of Action in 2014, which we also very well know as the Gender Plan of Action 2015 to 2020. Consistent with the principle of gender responsiveness in the preparatory process for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework in COP14 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt in 2018, gender equality and the role of women in the implementation of the convention was proposed as an overarching principle for the post-2020 framework. The first draft of the post-2020 GBF, published in July this year, proposed 21 targets, from which target 21 mentions women. However, it is crucial that gender considerations are addressed throughout the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, including in the principles, objectives, implementation, financing, monitoring, reporting, and review for the full realization of the 2050 vision. This is also needed to ensure that both the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and the post-2020 Gender Plan of Action are aligned and are complementary to each other to address and ensure that women and girls equal access, ownership, and control over their lands and territories and resources, and the full and effective engagement at all levels of policy and decision-making related to biodiversity. The CBD COP15, which was initially planned for last October and now being organized in two parts. The first part, one, actually just opened today in Kunming, from where our CBD Executive Secretary was conveying her message from in Kunming, China. So it opened today officially and will go on until October 15th. This will be followed by a second part, which will take place at the end of April next year in Kunming, China, in person, where the post-2020 GBF will be adopted along with the post-2020 Gender Plan of Action. Proposing gender equality and the role of women as an overarching principle requires considerations of how these issues would be addressed within the framework and its implementation. So today's dialogue aims to enrich these discussions in building momentum and paving ways forwards for women's rights, gender equality, and the future of biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ray. Now I turn to you, Maya, to moderate the dialogue panel with our special panelists. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pamela, for that introduction. My name is Maya Hayakawa. A good evening to you all from this part of the world. I am a senior presenter at BBC Africa, and I am absolutely honored to moderate this session. The discussion will be divided into two parts. First of all, we'll start off with the gender and biodiversity general context, and then we will wind up with taking a closer look and delving really deep into the gender equality segment. But before we get into the discussion, I'd like to briefly introduce my panelists. First up, we have the current Vice President of Costa Rica, Her Excellency Epsi Campbell-Barr. She is the first Black woman in Latin America to be elected Vice President. Vice President Barr has been a human rights and environmental activist long before she decided to join politics, and she co-founded the network of Afro-Caribbean and Afro-Latin American women in 1992 to highlight the unique struggles of Black women. She also served as a member of parliament in two different terms, from 2002 to 2006 and 2014 to 2018. And in 2016, Her Excellency was a member of the advisory panel for the UNDP's 2016 Human Development Report for Latin America and the Caribbean, titled Multidimensional Progress, Wellbeing Beyond Income, and coordinated the 2016 meeting of parliamentarians and political leaders of African descent of Americas and the Caribbean. Vice President Barr is particularly concerned with human rights, issues related to women, indigenous and Afro-descendant people, poverty, social development, and the environment. Thank you so much for being with us today. Also on the panel, we have Ms. Rai, the Director of Women for Biodiversity. She had spoken on earlier, just to give a bit of context, but she is a women's rights and environmental rights advocate. She also works on policy advocacy and research on the intersection of gender equality and women and girls' rights and environmental justice. She also serves as the global coordinator of the Women Caucus for the Convention on Biological Diversity, which supports women's civil society active engagement through active participation, information sharing, and inputs into the policy space on biodiversity and environment-related processes. Welcome, Ms. Rai. Also, we have David Boyd, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Environment. He's also an Associate Professor of Law, Policy, and Sustainability at the University of British Columbia. Boyd is also the author of 10 books, including The Rights of Nature, which was published back in 2017, The Optimist Environmentalist in 2015, and The Environmental Rights Revolution in 2012. Thank you so much for being here, David and also for your contribution to the conversation. And last but not least, we have Mr. Basil, the co-chair of the CBD Open-Ended Working Group 3 for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. He has over 27 years of experience working in Canada's Environment Department, and also in addition to this, being Canada's CBD focal point, his roles included Director General of Biodiversity and Partnerships and Director of Population Conservation and Management of the Canadian Wildlife Service, the chair of CITES Elephant Working Group, and CBD discussions on Indigenous knowledge and repatriation, as well as co-chair of the International Joint Commission on Great Lakes Water Quality Board and director of the Meteorological Service of Canada. Quite a CV over there. So without further ado, I'm going to go straight and jump into the discussion. Part one is looking at the general context of gender and biodiversity. For those who may not understand what the post-2020 biodiversity framework is all about, and also for those taking a look at what is different about this new framework in protecting the planet's biodiversity. So I'd like to begin with you, Mr. Basil. The post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework is a new global framework that is looking to be adopted next year at the CBD COP15 in order to protect the planet's biodiversity. Yet, when we look at the previous targets that we had from the last one, they weren't really met, due to various factors. The question on many minds is, what will be the key elements needed to ensure achieving the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature? And what are some of the lessons that we've learned from the previous plans that you see can be adopted in this new framework?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to join you. Can you hear me well? Signal if you can. Yes, okay. Lesson learned and what's going to be different and what we're trying to do different, and particularly one lesson learned that is relevant to this group. The previous framework was seen as the framework of the CBD focal point, the Minister of the Environment. What we realize and what we're trying to do is success is going to be there if all parts of society are engaged. So we're trying to build a framework for all, not only a framework for the Minister of the Environment, not only a framework for the whole of government, but one that includes every part of society, from business to finance to civil society, and obviously women. So that's one big difference. The other ones, and you will want to focus on that too, is to set up realistic targets. And that's trying to find that fine balance between reaching the objective, so doing what we need to do, but also trying to be realistic and have in place targets that people can actually implement. And that's where your group is having a very important role in terms of implementation. So we want to have a framework that is not a piece of paper. If I work very well with Tina and others, and we do great work and come out with a great plan, but that plan stays on the shelf, it's only going to be a piece of paper. What we need is action and implementation. So let me focus on the three aspects where I see a very important role for gender. One, on negotiation. Two, on the GBF itself. And three, on implementation. Coming back to the first one, I see a very important role for women, but they have to have not only the role, but the capacity. And I've been very, very pleased. Last week, I participated in the training of female negotiator in French-speaking countries for climate. And they asked that I come to talk about biodiversity, because often those ladies are the same one negotiating on the biodiversity side, and they were already making the links that we're having trouble making as an institution. So how can we replicate those training and those opportunities to give the capacity enabling women in every part of society to be part of those discussions? Second, having a role and a place in the negotiation. And I think we have made probably a lot more in the CBD than in many other conventions, but that doesn't mean that we got to stop. We got to continue and we got to go further. Second, on the GBF, the Global Biodiversity Framework itself, I was listening very, very carefully to the presentation made by Tina, where she talked the role of women and girls is not just one target. It has to be through the whole framework. And we have it in several places, in the preambular paragraph, in the targets, at the back. But is it enough? Is it well done? Is it what you're looking for? We tried our best with Francis and with the team, but we're waiting for you to tell us how we can make that better. That's a very important part. And then finally, at the implementation stage, at the national level, at the local level, how can we translate those targets into action plan, national action plan, local action plans that are relevant and engage you and engage all gender in a way that maximizes the outcome? So that is a little bit the three message I wanted to leave with you. The one on the lesson learned and the fact we need the frameworks, that is a framework for all. And that's a notion where we're going to need your leadership and we're going to need your engagement, because that's a new concept, and naturally there are people discussing that. Thank you very much. Back to you, Maya.
Thank you. I love how you've highlighted just the importance of looking at realistic targets and being able to implement these targets. Otherwise, it's just a piece of paper, which is exactly what we're trying to avoid. I'd like now to move over to our next speaker, Mr. Boyd. From the perspective of the right to a healthy environment, how would you describe the link between women's rights, gender equality, and biodiversity? How do they intersect and interact with each other?
Well, thanks very much, Maya. And let me just say thank you for the invitation to join you today. It's really a genuine honor, and this is such a vitally important topic. I really want to start by sharing some super exciting and relevant news from the UN Human Rights Council here in Geneva, which last Friday recognized for the first time at the global level that everyone, everywhere, has the fundamental human right to live in a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. And what's really interesting is this effort was led by amazing women from all over the world, including Costa Rica's ambassadors, Catalina de Vandes Aguilar, Shara Duncan Villalobos, Slovenia's ambassadors, Anita Pipan and her predecessor, Sabina Stadler, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, Inger Anderson from the UN Environment Program, civil society leaders, including Astrid Puentes, Kristen Cordero, Sandra Epalratian, Chiara Lewori, Lucy McKernan, and many, many more. It was a process driven by these amazing women. And the right to a healthy environment is critical in this context, because not only does it include clean air, safe and sufficient water, healthy and sustainably produced food, a safe climate, non-toxic environments where people can live, work, study, and play, but also healthy ecosystems and biodiversity.
Muchísimas gracias, Maya. Yo quisiera plantear algunos de los temas que me parecen más importantes en las brechas que tenemos las mujeres en términos de la biodiversidad y la conservación. Son muchísimos esos retos y algunos de ellos son fundamentales en términos de cómo podríamos maximizar la agenda de conservación y biodiversidad. El primero que quisiera mencionar es el acceso a la tierra. Esta es una de las principales brechas que existen entre hombres y mujeres en todo el mundo. No solamente en los países de América Latina, particularmente, inclusive en mi propio país, donde las mujeres son propietarias apenas en el 15.5% de la tierra versus el 84.4% que poseen los hombres. Esta es una realidad que les limita absolutamente la posibilidad de incidir en los temas de conservación, a pesar de ser ellas una de las más afectadas. El segundo tema, que está estrechamente vinculado con el anterior, es que las mujeres enfrentan muchas más brechas para acceder a la asistencia técnica y al financiamiento, que limitan el empoderamiento económico, el empoderamiento social y la capacidad de tomar decisiones sobre el poco acceso a la tierra que tienen. El tercer gran tema, y quizás es uno de los temas sobre los cuales tenemos que entender que la tarea de darle un rol a las mujeres en términos de la biodiversidad y la conservación son las tareas que las mujeres tienen que enfrentar en el hogar. No hay la menor duda que lo que pasa en los espacios privados y lo que pasa en los espacios públicos inciden directamente en el rol de las mujeres. Es la responsabilidad del cuidado de las familias, que históricamente ha recaído sobre las mujeres, pero que en los tiempos de pandemia ha acrecentado ese rol de cuidado y cuidado de la familia. Poco se ha avanzado en la corresponsabilidad de cuidados y poco se ha avanzado también en roles mayores más comunitarios. Esta representa una de las mayores barreras para que las mujeres participen en formación técnica, espacios de discusión, toma de decisiones y el uso y manejo de los recursos naturales. Ejemplo sencillo de esto es cuando la institucionalidad se ciega a esta realidad y establece unos horarios que atentan contra la propia participación de las mujeres. El tercer tema que quisiera plantear como una brecha grave es el acceso a la educación. La educación es un derecho fundamental para todas las personas y es una condición básica para acceder de manera informada a procesos de toma de decisión y hacer valer sus derechos. En esta intervención quiero hacer énfasis al realmente la brecha que existe particularmente en el acceso de las mujeres, las niñas y las jóvenes a las carreras de la cuarta revolución industrial, a las ciencias, las matemáticas, ingenierías, muchas relacionadas, que están estrechamente relacionadas con los empleos actuales y los futuros y que debemos de promover desde la CBD, los empleos verdes, los relacionados con soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, las ciencias agrícolas, la biología, las ingenierías, las asociadas con tecnología, que son áreas que son fundamentales para el cuidado de la biodiversidad y la conservación. Y finalmente quisiera subrayar lo relacionado al acceso a los puestos de decisión. El camino para la participación de las mujeres en puestos de decisión ha sido muy lento y ha limitado a nivel global y en general los espacios de toma de decisión en biodiversidad. Quiero resaltar que el gobierno de Costa Rica hoy tiene un gabinete paritario, pero que en general esa no es la norma. Y que celebro que una de las coorganizadoras de este panel también fuese la vicepresidenta de Uruguay. Ministras, necesitamos más ministras de ambiente para que se están uniendo y que están haciendo un trabajo fundamental. Nosotras en nuestro país, la ministra de Ambiente tiene un rol muy importante. La ruta hacia la paridad y la toma de decisiones sobre recursos naturales aún es muy largo, pero es necesario generarla también con una equidad en el debate de todos los temas relacionados con biodiversidad y conservación. Finalmente, quisiera celebrar la aprobación del derecho humano a un ambiente sano, participación en la que nuestro país, Costa Rica, tuvo un rol fundamental, tal como fue planteado aquí, la embajadora Catalina de Bandas, la viceembajadora nuestra, Shara Duncan, y muchos países que permitieron que por primera vez tengamos como un elemento central el derecho a un ambiente sano. Allí también tendremos que promover el derecho a una participación equitativa de las mujeres para la conservación del ambiente y la biodiversidad. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for that. I'd like now to cross over to Ms. Rai. Could you please share the role that inclusivity plays or can play in the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework? Why, in your opinion, is it gravely important to do so?
Thank you, Maya. I think after coming after all these distinguished guests and what EPSI put it so well, I don't think I have so much to say. I will just be reiterating those points. But I think it is about time, though. And I think as you've heard all these speakers, David, Basil, and he talked about EPSI, it's not that there isn't examples or ways where women are not engaging. All right, like there are good practices, there are local initiatives, there are women in policy spaces, but it's not enough. The playing field for everybody should be equal. I think, like I said, it's really very important where there are systemic barriers for women and girls are not the same everywhere. So that is what really limits. You talk about true inclusivity is not there. I mean, the aspirations are always there, right? We're talking about, you talk about even international agreements. We're talking about the aspirations. We had, recently a big, the Gender Equality Forum. So the promises and the aspirations, there's no dearth of it, I think. But what really needs to play a key role is to ensure that those aspirations are placed within policies and actions that actually will empower the women at the national level, at the local level, at the regional level, at the international level. That's what's really needed. So I think for me, that's the reason why we're really happy to bring this agenda forward, is that the post-2020 framework is supposed to be very ambitious. It's a 30-year plan, a blueprint for 2050. Now, within that, for it to be really include the issue of inclusivity, we need to see actions. We need to have it written down of what those actions look like. When we talk about gender responsive, what does it really mean to be gender responsive? Participation is not enough. Capacity building is important, but you also need to make sure that there are enabling environments, which is also linked up with financial assistance. You're talking about, you need to also have funds for women, led by women, develop the way they want and how they want their capacity to be built, or what kind of capacities they need. So I think that's the one kind of empowerment or inclusivity I really feel is really needed, is to really put in place simplified solutions. So that is the reason why we're talking about that this biodiversity discussion should not be left at saying that, okay, we will mainstream gender, we will make it gender responsive. And that is the reason why we're working really hard to make sure that there would be, say, for example, the indicators process comes in, where we have an indicator with each target to ensure that all the policies that will go from the global to the local, national level will actually have indicators or guidelines to ensure that gender considerations are truly reflected, to make sure then the policies will be made for women or maybe by women. So I think it's really very important to really look at it. So we have Target 21, say, for example, in the GBF currently. But if you look at, that's the enabling condition, right? When you look at the overarching vision of the 2050, you're talking about area-based management, you're talking about restoration, you're talking about sustainable use. There are so many more elements. And actually, if you look at it, there really isn't anything within the rest of the 20 targets that talks about gender. So I think to be really gender responsive, we really need to make sure that anywhere that action should also be identified, very specific of what it really means to be gender responsive. What are those actions that will actually enable or give the tools to women? An example of that is the NBSAP. In the biodiversity discussion, NBSAP is supposed to be a key reporting document. But the analysis of the NBSAPs themselves have been, like, though the preamble of the CB talks about the roles of women, the review of the NBSAP has shown that less than 4% of the reports don't mention women. Women are categorized as vulnerable groups or beneficiaries, and very less as saying that what happened, what are the actions, how were they the agents of change. So I really hope that, going forward, that aspiration would be really taken forward in concrete, a target. That's the reason we're talking about, a target to really ensure that, like the SDGs, is not only a standalone, but would be able to cut through it. And we really need to have that to make sure that the biodiversity 30-year framework will be inclusive, truly and truly transformative. So thank you. I'll end there.
That was very, very well said, as you've highlighted the importance of being able to really define what it means to ensure that we have inclusivity in some of the responses that we have when it comes to biodiversity. We've heard from our speakers talking about gender equality and women's empowerment being highlighted as a very important consideration in the implementation of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework as we're coming out of a pandemic as well. So I'd like to hear from you, Your Excellency, EPSI, what policies and actions do you think we need to consider and we need to put in place in the GBF to ensure that women have access to equal opportunities for leadership, for women to be able to sit on the decision-making table and also to effectively engage at all levels of decision-making in matters related to the objectives of the convention? What would you say we need to put in terms of policies and action points?
Thank you, Maya. En el marco mundial para la biodiversidad post-2020 debe de tener algunas importantísimas acciones afirmativas que garanticen que todas las partes se comprometan en los años venideros a acelerar el cierre de las brechas de género. Incluir una meta específica para el cierre de las brechas de género en el sector biodiversidad. Tal como lo tenemos en los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible, nosotros tendremos que tener una meta específica en los objetivos relativos a biodiversidad. Es vital que se diseñen políticas públicas y que se inviertan recursos en la generación de condiciones habilitadoras que permitan la real y efectiva participación de las mujeres y de las niñas en los procesos de toma de decisiones y de gobernanza a los objetivos de la CBD en todos los niveles. No vamos a cerrar las brechas si no ponemos acciones afirmativas con metas concretas que nos permitan avanzar en ese sentido. También se debe establecer e instar a las partes a generar reportes con información desagregada de género por edad, así como incidir para que las plataformas de expertos que lideran la generación de información para la toma de decisiones, tanto en la CBD como de la Convención de Cambio Climático, lo hagan incorporando la perspectiva de género, lo hagan pensando en las mujeres. Esto permitirá diferenciar las afectaciones y de los problemas ambientales que enfrentan las mujeres y poder diseñar soluciones que atiendan de manera real esas diferencias. Finalmente, hay que garantizar la movilización de recursos públicos y privados necesarios para impulsar los cambios transformativos y tan necesarias soluciones basadas en la naturaleza. Pero estas intervenciones se tienen que hacer asegurando la igualdad en el acceso a la participación tanto a las mujeres como a los pueblos indígenas y pueblos afrodescendientes. Ejemplo de esto es nuestro programa Más Mujeres, Más Natura, que establece por primera vez criterios sensibles a las brechas de género en el otorgamiento de pagos por servicios ambientales y 2 créditos ajustados a las condiciones de las mujeres rurales para permitirles desarrollar sosteniblemente sus unidades productivas. Finalmente, las mujeres representamos 3.85 billones de soluciones. Las mujeres somos parte de esas soluciones y no podemos ignorar esa fuerza para recuperar la salud de la tierra, la salud de la humanidad. Es el momento de actuar ahora. El nexo entre mujeres y naturaleza siempre ha estado presente, pero hemos desperdiciado ese conocimiento y esas posibilidades y ahora es el tiempo de actuar. Tenemos que poner en el centro a las mujeres para lograr ese futuro que añoramos, un futuro que restablezca el respeto a la biodiversidad y el respeto a los derechos humanos de todas las personas. Si no hacemos esto y no hacemos una alianza fuerte entre las mujeres a nivel global, no vamos a ser capaces de cumplir con la meta de los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible al 2030 y mucho menos con nuestras altas aspiraciones de conservación y de protección de la biodiversidad. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for that. Mr. Basil, I'd like to hear from you because earlier on you talked a lot about and emphasized a lot on targets being feasible. I think that was the one thing I took away from your statement earlier, is making sure that our action points are feasible, and work is currently underway right now to ensure that the process in developing and implementing the post-2020 delivery framework is a gender inclusive one. Time and efficiency is extremely important. And from where you sit, what are some of the long-term solutions that can be implemented, especially as the world looks towards building back better post this COVID period that we have been experiencing?
Thank you. That's a very interesting and important question. And perhaps I'm going to come across as a bit of an idealist and a positive kind of glass half empty person. My sense is that if we build back better, we're going to be building back a society that takes better advantage of the strengths and the capacity of all. And that's a society that should be taking into consideration all gender equally, all expression of gender. And then we want a world that leaves nobody behind. Why do we want that? We want that because that's fair, that match our values, and that's the way we want to live. But we also want to do that because we cannot do anyhow, but without the contribution of everybody. It is going to be, we are facing important crises. Nature, which is what we're talking here today, but climate change, health, and all those are related and all those are integrated. And we need to have those integrated response taking advantage of every capacity. We cannot afford to leave half of the humanity outside of the effort. We cannot afford to leave outside half of the brain that we have available to us outside of the equation. So I see that a framework that engage all is a better framework. A framework that capitalize on the engagement of all is one that is going to be easier to implement. So the vision is one, and that gave me the opportunity to talk about the vision a little bit. I think one of the big challenge we have is we're not able to describe the world we're going to. We're focusing on the challenge of getting there, the cost of the transition, the difficulties in changing the rules, the change in the incentive and subsidies. What we're not describing is that better future, one where our children will have a better health, an easier time, more fulfilling jobs, a greater place for all. So let's try to focus on where the journey is taking us. Yes, there will be difficulties along the way, but by working together, we'll get there. Thank you.
Mr. Basil, I also want to hear from you in terms of ensuring that we all move together so that no one is really left behind. Because as Ms. Rai had said earlier, you know, different countries are facing different challenges. When we look at the systematic challenges that women are facing, it's different based on the economies that they're coming from, based on the challenges that they face every single day, the systemic policies as well. How do we ensure that we are tackling this in a way that no woman gets left behind, regardless of where it is that they are or whatever challenges it is that they are facing that might be unique to that particular region?
So there is probably two parts to answer to that. One part is the basic, where we're going to find the financial resource to make this happen. And if you look at the proposal we put in on the table with draft one, we're identifying some financial numbers, and those are big. They're very big. They're huge, but they're backed up by very, very concrete and reputable financial institution. So let's first tackle that. And I'm been quite encouraged by recent announcements by donor countries, by philanthropy. So we're seeing people stepping up to the plate that we've never seen before. So that is one part. The second part is what happened with those resources? Where will they go? Who's going to be making decision on allocation? What are the projects that are going to be funded? And earlier, I heard some of our colleagues on the panel talking about the National Biodiversity Action Plan. We have an opportunity to define how those are going to be done. And perhaps now is the time to consider a gender test to those, where whether at the end of the day, before a certain plan is going toward the financial side and whether donors are going to start looking at it, could we see a look at the plan, a review of those plans from a gender perspective? Could that be a criteria for funding? Could that be a way to test the validity and the efficacy and of those plans? So those are ideas I put on the table, and you may want to consider in crafting your position. And I think at the end of the day, if we can have those kind of plan, that would be great. And then finally, capacity building. How are we going to be, beside the financial resource, how are we going to be building capacity at a local level that engage and reach out to women in ways that are relevant to them and with content that are relevant to them? So that's going to be very important. And I'm looking forward to working with you to make those ideas concrete, relevant action on the ground. Thank you.
Very well said, looking at it from both the local and global perspective and making sure that we're moving towards those two different levels. Mr. Boyd, what would be some key elements and actions that should be taken to ensure that the Global 2020 GBF does not go back to doing conservation as usual? I think one statement that I heard earlier on from one of our speakers is that it's not business as usual. So how do we make sure that we don't go back to, business as usual?
Hi, Maya, I think we've lost David Boyd there.
Okay, all right, then I guess we can actually move over to you, Ms. Rai. Developing frameworks and policies is just one side of the coin. We've heard as well this whole idea of having feasible targets and feasibility being quite important. How can we develop a post-2020 gender plan of action as an implementation tool for the post-2020 global biodiversity framework in a very practical way that is sustainable and that is long-term?
No, thank you, Maya, for the question. I think it's also really good to share to people that though there's a lot of highlight on the post-2020 process, the parallel process that we shouldn't forget about is the gender plan of action, the post-gender plan of action that will support the post-2020 implementation. I think in this regard, what we really want to see is that the ambition from the parties or commitments is towards both. We want to make sure that there's an alignment. The previous gender plan of action was there, but we're really hoping that with the new plan, that there will be more actions set that will complement the goals and targets and indicators that are reflected in the GBF, and hopefully they will be made better by the time it goes to the COP. And the same way, so the way that the gender plan of action is there currently, there are some good elements. So maybe for an example, I could talk about is human rights defenders, or talking about more rights-specific actions. So there has to also be that complementarity. There's some of these elements that are very crucial for us to take into considerations. Like I said, we are dealing in a world that, instead of meeting with each other face-to-face, we really haven't had a meeting to be able to really engage and discuss these issues, and to be able to build back, I would say, we really need to make sure that there are elements that are crucial to put into place in both the spaces, because while the post-2020 gender global biodiversity framework will be adopted at COP15, and so will the gender plan of action. So we really would like for parties to also be ambitious to take forward the GPA, the gender plan of action, together when they will be flashing down plans at the national level. I think I'll keep it to there. And
thank you, Ms. Rai, for that. Your Excellency, EPSI, you highlighted earlier on some of the major gaps and challenges that women face. You talked about land ownership, you talked about lack of access to education, access to finance, some of the social challenges that, and the roles as well, that women are playing as being caregivers in the family, especially during the pandemic, and how they've been affected, that make it difficult for them to participate in the biodiversity conversation. What would you like to see moving forward? What is your vision and what is your hope for women as the framework sets the stage and is set to be further negotiated in 2022? What direction would you hope that these negotiations will take to ensure that no woman in any country, especially in the developing countries, are left behind?
Muchas gracias, Maya. Dos cosas quisiera plantear aquí. Lo primero es que la inversión que estamos haciendo a nivel global en términos de conservación de la biodiversidad y del cuidado del ambiente tiene que priorizarse paulatinamente hasta llegar a un 50% recursos para las mujeres. No podemos tener un discurso que habla de equidad de género, no podemos tener una agenda ambiciosa de conservación de la biodiversidad que no esté aparejada con la inversión de recursos que se requiere. Y yo creo que eso es un tema central. Tenemos una gran cantidad de inversión global para la conservación, pero esta sigue contribuyendo a aumentar las brechas que tenemos las mujeres con respecto a los hombres. Lo segundo que quisiera ver es a más mujeres jóvenes y mujeres participando en los espacios de toma de decisión. Quisiera que nos pusiéramos la meta de que no haya un solo panel de discusión de ningún tema relativo con conservación de biodiversidad, con la agenda del CBC, con la agenda de conservación ambiental, en donde al menos no tengamos una participación paritaria de mujeres. No es posible que si participemos en debates donde sigue prevaleciendo una voz que puede ser una voz técnica autorizada, pero que esté dejando afuera muchísimas voces. Lo tercero es realmente tener una visión de las comunidades y una participación absolutamente activa de las comunidades. Participación no solamente en la búsqueda de soluciones, sino en los accesos a los recursos financieros, políticos y los recursos técnicos necesarios para hacer avanzar la agenda. Finalmente, la aspiración es que podamos realmente garantizar que la agenda de la biodiversidad sea una agenda de las mujeres y que las mujeres estén en la agenda de la biodiversidad. Creo que estamos obligadas nosotras mujeres a crear una gran red de mujeres, líderes políticas a nivel global, con mujeres africanas, mujeres de América Latina, asiáticas, que realmente estemos dispuestas de manera sistemática y permanente a colocar los temas de la biodiversidad y nuestro rol, y principalmente las soluciones que tengan esa visión, esa realidad de las mujeres y que nos permitan cerrar las brechas. Solamente así alcanzaremos las metas mayores, no solo de conservación, sino de realmente un desarrollo justo, equitativo, sostenible, con soluciones verdes basadas en la naturaleza que le permitan a todas las personas estar allí. Personas jóvenes, mujeres de todas las identidades, en los espacios de toma de decisión y recursos financieros distribuidos no solo equitativamente, sino que estén centrados en la disminución de brechas, es el único camino que tenemos. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much for that. Okay, Ms. Rai, I'd like to hear from you because loss of biodiversity and climate change impacts people differently. But then we've heard this over and over today from our various speakers that they have been linked, and more often than not, women receive harsher impacts. What are the inequalities women face, and how did this leave them more vulnerable during this COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank you, Maya. I think when you talk, okay, I'll just take it from a right to a healthy environment. What does it really mean? I think for me, it is to also ensure that every action has a consequence, and usually it falls on women. You know, we talked about a small example of care work, which doesn't really get recognized as real work, right? With the pandemic, in all spheres of societies for women, from wherever they are, have had this double burden, right? As we say, double, triple, quadruple for Indigenous women. Is just that it's just by, I don't know, what do you call it? By de facto, it's just that the way the roles are in societies really hasn't given them the right to sometimes maybe decide of how they really want to plan things out, especially if it's in a household, right? Women are usually seen as making a different kind of decisions versus what a male member of a society would make. So simple things like that. And if you can take it 3 or 5 times fold in the spheres of, say, agriculture. We talk about farmers. The role of farmer, when you say somebody, a farmer, the first mental vision that comes to your mind would be a man, not necessarily a woman, right? Because somehow that's supposed to be a work of a man. But if you look at the agricultural sector or a fisherman, right? You don't see a fisherwoman, you see fishermen. But if you look at the value chain of where the whole process of the production process is, you will see that actually women contribute so much more to this economic sectors. But their roles, it could be like, I think FC talked about labor. It's just because if you're a woman, you're paid less because you're so it's from that to all sectors. So I think that's the reason why we're saying that looking at the larger picture of biodiversity, where so many elements will impact those structures, may exacerbate inequalities further. It could be an example of, say, infrastructure, or we're talking about mainstreaming biodiversity in agricultural sectors. We're talking about private sector. We're talking about investments. You're also talking about displacements. You're talking about gender-based violence. IUCN recently came out with a report through a two-year report on gender-based violence and environmental linkages, and it's got case studies. And all gender, not talk about only women, but young men, or of how all those roles where they're not safeguards or policy in place impact these roles. And we just want these elements, the social elements, to also impact the development of the post-2020. Not only the economic factor of it, right? We shouldn't be driven by economics, especially right now, where the pandemic has really put us in such a vulnerable situation. We never thought that something like that would almost cripple our societies, right? So we really need to do something very different. We really need to make sure that we really take in these, be very careful of what kind of technologies, what kind of investments, what kind of structures or green recovery that we are looking at. It should not displace, it should not further take away the rights of all, especially because it also impacts the people who are actually in vulnerable situations. So that is what we really want to say, that it really has to be a holistic approach, a whole of society approach.
I love, Ms. Wright, that you mentioned that it's not just about the economics, but it's also about some of the social and the cultural issues that are playing a part in the inequalities that women face. But just to kind of close this conversation so that we don't leave it at such a negative point, I want to hear from you, Ms. Rai, what some of the wins are that you've been able to see on ground. What are some of the things that you have been able to achieve to ensure that the momentum is maintained?
Well, we are here, and this has been a very big achievement. To be able to have this panel and have all these distinguished guests here, I would say has been it is a big step forward. And I can't even thank enough, Basil and Ms. Epsi and Beatrice, everybody, David, to take this opportunity. So like I said, the aspirations are there and they've always supported the work. And I think even Basil will know, since we started working in the CBD COP, we have come a long way, with even advancing, taking up this issue at such a global level, at a high level. The reason we're also doing this is to also influence the coming days of the high level segment of the CBD COP15 that is ongoing currently. So I think there has been steps. And like I started the discussion saying that there is no dearth of good examples. Women are there. Women are the agents of change. If you look at the community, if you look at the farmers, if you look at the young fisher folks, they are doing the work. They are taking care of nature. But as people, like at least for me, who's been in this advocacy space, is to really create that awareness and say that there's no dearth of knowledge out there. But for enabling environment, their rights have to be recognized. Their rights have to be recognized because they are there. They're not vulnerable. They're very strong women. And it's time that they have a chance to live in dignity. They get at least an opportunity to decide what they want, what kind of development they want, and what kind of a life they want for themselves versus somebody else defining it for them. So I think, so that's there. And I think with this, post 2020, like we said, we are pushing for a standalone target on gender. And thanks to Costa Rica for also supporting us. So we are seeing that momentum growing of an awareness that this is something that is needed. This is something that there is a global momentum. You talk about the SDGs, you talk about the Gender Equality Forum. So now we also want to see the same aspiration being brought forward in the global GBF, Global Biodiversity Framework. And I think, this itself for me has been wonderful to see us bringing this forward. Thanks, Maya.
Thank you, Ms. I just want to read out a few of these comments that are coming out to the chats, just in response to what people have to say. Very, very interesting stuff over here. Over here is from Marta. Marta says, this is a most important discussion and discernment, but it is not enough. The cultural aspect behind all these obstacles and obstructions is key. Men are the major problem at the center of these inequalities and lack of real development. So there is much to do about the defining power that men have and that they exercise daily, and in all instances, creating the world as it exists. And now a new world order, which is going back to socio-political, economic, environmental, cultural, concrete realities being shaped as we talk. How then must we proceed? And the call is for efficient, transformative presence every day and always by women and men of all ages and realities. So Basil, I'd really love to hear from you, you being a man and being part of that conversation and being at the center of also addressing these inequalities that women face. How can men in leadership play a role in advancing and also in addressing these inequalities for women as well?
So I would say gender issue is not a woman issue, it's an everybody issue. And yes, there are men that are blocking progress, but there are also men that are engaged in progress. So that's my vision for the future. That's a vision where we all work together. I'll go one step further than Tina. This is not just about right. Having the right respected is the first step. The ultimate goal is full engagement willingly and to the fullest extent of all gender. So this is where I think we need to go. I totally support the work needed on the right, but that's not the end. That's just the beginning. And that's where I see that. And I think women should count on the support of many, many, many men around the world to accomplish that, because we see this is a happier world for all of us. We're living together. We're not living in isolation. We are living with friends, with spouses, with daughters, and we all want those to be part of that better world we're looking for. And we have the opportunity with biodiversity to make that happen. And we have an opportunity. It's beyond the resource. It's also how we shape our message. How do we shape what we want to do? How do we address the people that are making the decision? So my vision is one that is positive, where we're going to do that. We've made a lot of progress. I think we should all, men and women, be very proud of that progress. We should all, men and women, be cognizant of what's the road ahead of us and why we need to make those efforts for a better world. Thank you.
As we close the session, I'd love to hear from the three of you what your one message is that you would like everybody to take home with them. If there's just one message that they should take home, what would that message be? I would begin with you, Your Excellency Campbell.
Muchas gracias, Maya. Mi mensaje final es que tenemos una oportunidad extraordinaria al frente. Tenemos una oportunidad de trabajar conjuntamente, de darle la voz a las generaciones más jóvenes, a hombres y mujeres jóvenes que están en una disposición de transformar, hacer una alianza global para que aceleremos el paso y para que preservemos la vida y la salud nuestra y la salud del planeta. Hagámoslo pensando en que este mundo solo lo podemos salvar, este planeta solo lo podemos salvar si lo hacemos conjuntamente, las mujeres y los hombres en igualdad de condiciones, las generaciones, todas las generaciones y las personas de los diferentes culturas y países. Es el momento de actuar, hagámoslo conjuntamente.
How about for you, Ms. Rai, your final remark and message?
My final remark, you think everybody said it so well. I'm saying I think it's wonderful to be here and look at this momentum growing. And I think there is definitely a hope, Basil, like you said, definitely a lot of support that we are getting. And hopefully we will take this momentum forward. And we really encourage everybody, like I said, the issue of climate, the issue of disaster, desertification, biodiversity loss, they all are interlinked. So if you are working on something else, you know that somehow you're also interlinked with the other processes. So I think my vision for living in harmony in nature would be that I really hope that 30 years down the line, my daughter is not at the same meeting asking or demanding for the same recognition. So I think that's the vision I definitely foresee myself, that it's going to be a different world for her.
Basil, for you, your final remark briefly.
I'm thinking about some key time where women have talked to me and expressed their views of the world, and that has opened my eyes. So I think you should do that. Talk to men, explain your views, explain what's the way you see the world and where there is problem. And men will listen to you, and we will build a better future for all of us. Thank you.
I love that. Thank you very much to my panelists today for your time, for your knowledge, for sharing your views and your insights as well. And based on the discussion that we've had today, it is absolutely clear that women cannot be left behind or be left out of these important conversations concerning biodiversity, especially since women are the most affected by environmental changes, as we have seen from our speakers today. Thank you all for joining us from different parts of the world. I can see someone from Uganda has joined in. I've seen Colombia and different countries across the globe. Thank you very much. This has been one of the most enlightening conversations that I've had the honor of being a part of. Thank you for allowing me to be your moderator for this session. And I will now hand it back over to Pamela for the closing session.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists and Maya, for inspiring all to take action for accelerating the effective inclusion of girls and women in decision-making processes and as leaders of environmental solutions. Now, I invite Ms. Schultz to offer us the event closing remarks. The floor is yours. Ms. Schultz? Welcome.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, it has been a lovely event, and it's very, very interesting to listen to all the participants and also, of course, the panel debate about this very, very important subject. And as some of you know, Sweden has a feminist foreign policy that stresses then, the importance of rights of women and girls and representation of women and girls, resources in budgeting, and also realia analysis of an in-depth understanding of, for example, power relations and also the social norms. And I think that is what we call, that could contribute to transformative change. In the same time, we have biodiversity very high on the agenda for our foreign policy. And also SIDA, where I work, we have recently got a special assignment to look into strengthen SIDA's work with biodiversity in between 2020 and 2023. And during that time, the entry points for this enforcement regarding biodiversity, the entry points are both gender and indigenous peoples and local communities' rights. And so for us, of course, it's very, very important to see the development of the gender action plan and the new gender action plan under the CBD, and how we can help out in the implementation later on of that of the action plan when it has hopefully then been adopted at COP15. But I also just want to say that we have also already now then a lot of contributions to gender and biodiversity, and about 80% of the support for biodiversity is also gender integrated. So that it's very strong link for us in our normative work and normative dialogues with partners and others on gender and biodiversity. And then I could mention a lot of examples of the kind of collaborations we have, but I just wanted to say now to not take up too much time that we are very pleased to announce that we have a new support and partnership then with Women for Biodiversity. And we see this as a very strategic collaboration for our learning. And also we hope that this collaboration and of course then the work of Women for Biodiversity can also help implementing the new the new gender action plan under the global biodiversity framework. I think I will stop here and I just want to congratulate you all to this event. And I think everyone who listened in really enjoyed listening to this very knowledge deep discussions that you had. So thanks a lot, and the work will continue.
Thank you, Ms. Schultz. And now I would like to give the floor to Ms. Ray to acknowledge all the persons that made possible this event.
Thank you, Pamela. Thank you so much. This is a great opportunity for me. This has been wonderful. So first of all the participants, thank you so much, because I know the timing has been really different time zones. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us for this event today. I hope it was informative. Like I said, this is just a beginning. We are just getting started. So we look forward to having all of you on board in our coming webinars and sessions and negotiations up to COP15 and beyond. So first, I would really like to take a big thanks to our panel speakers. Vice President Epsi Carr, thank you so much for taking the time. And also Vice President Beatrix, It was wonderful to have your leadership in this and to take the opportunity to push and give us that momentum. Basil, thank you so much. You've always been very supportive of our work and for taking this time to again ensure that we push forward for a gender responsive post 2020. And we will be approaching to all the men who are attending the COP and the other meetings. That's well taken recommendation. Of course, to Mr. David Boyd for his time too, and showing us the linkages and sharing experiences. And also for Maria Schultz from CEDA, who has also supported us for this webinar. And this, like she said, will be something that we want to take forward as our knowledge building work forward to ensure that we follow through of how to work on the gender plan of action, the post 2020 gender plan of action, and strengthen this advocacy work that we've embarked on. So together with that, then I will take the first opportunity to, along with CEDA, also WWF for their support, and our partners with IUCN, the OCHR, and of course our other members, supporters from FARN and EROG. I also would like this opportunity to give a big thanks to our friend there, Lulu, who you will see in the background, the graphic facilitator from Nairobi. And then we also have our interpreters. And I really want to take this extra effort to give the opportunity and the recognition of the whole team that has made this event possible today. So as we said, we've been very happy to say that we were able to provide 6 simultaneous interpretation in the 6 languages. So we had 12 interpreters on board, and that would be Jabril and Hannah, Maria, Daniela, Gail, Rachel, Xaviera, Leong, Shirley, and we also have Krishnir and Susan who supported the sign language. So thank you very, very much for your expertise to make sure that we are able to spread our knowledge, our work to a wider audience. Of course, to the moderators, Maya, thank you so much for a wonderful facilitation. And also next, I would say also my colleague that we worked on this, Pamela, that we made this happen. So thank you so much for your support to really visualizing and coming through, and we did it. So this is really great. And also for what we did for this event, we also provided broadcasting, so live broadcasting in all the languages, which will be available on YouTube, so that we will be able to share it further with our networks and members and other parties. Last but not the least, I also would like to thank our very small secretariat team who came together to put this event together. So that's Claire, Madarang, and Shruti Ajit, who's really helped me put this all together. So thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, Ray. And to
Thank
conclude,
you. Bye-bye.
To conclude, I would like to thank everyone for their support and making it possible for us to come together to raise the voice of all women and girls around the world and making sure that they are not left behind in the negotiation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you for being part of this event. Muchas gracias. Hasta luego.
Thank you, everybody. You should all get together on the screen for 2 seconds.
Recording stopped.